what makes sense? What kind of deal makes sense to you to work with a major label? You know, I had to ask.
No, I know. How do I want to answer this? I find myself constantly in friction with the label because I feel like...
You don't say.
I know.
You don't say.
I feel like myself, but it also comes from the perspective of like, remember I said this is my playbook, rip it up and do it better. Well, I'm me, so this is my playbook. So like, you're the label and I have done your job before. This is how I want to roll out my artist.
Yeah.
And I want you to be a passenger in the car, not the driver.
Difficult for you to say that to somebody on the other side?
Yeah, it's very difficult. But it also, sometimes friction is created where I talk about creative ideas can come from anybody at any age and any walk of life. Someone can have a brilliant creative idea. That is not something you need a resume for. That is just something that needs to come out of someone's brain. Mechanical ideas come from experience. And sometimes I have fights with the label where it's like, you can't do this because we can't do that on Spotify, or we can't swap the mix, or we can't do whatever. I'm like, you're 100% wrong.
You're the wrong guy.
Because I've done it before.
Yeah.
So it becomes one of those things where my friction sometimes comes from a place of like,
it's just frustration.
Experience.
But it's the frustration.
It's like, I've actually done this before. I actually know how to do your job. It doesn't mean I'm going to come up with all the creative ideas. You could totally come up with those. Doesn't mean I know how to manage your budget. I don't know where you're prioritizing your spend right now. You might have another project I don't even know about that you need to spend money on this quarter, and that's why you're reducing the bunt spend on X, Y, and Z. That's fair. I'm not running your business, I'm running the bunt business. But we're in constant friction of that. At the same time, David Massey's over there, who I know you experience it with, and he's at Arista.
Okay.
And I love Massey.
Who's great? Massey's great.
Phenomenal.
Massey's
he's an artist.
Yeah.
He's a champion for artists.
Yeah, for
and I
sure.
have a great relationship with him. So when there's real friction that we need to really work through, we try to work through it. But the deal that makes sense for me...
And Massey listens.
He does.
He'll listen to the managers because he understands how close the relationship is with manager and artist. He really gets it.
He does. So I think that the relationship that makes sense for me from an artist perspective to a label's perspective, and I'm strictly speaking of me, is I eventually want to build a team around my artist. And if a record label helps me do that, cool. We could talk about it. We could talk about what the split looks like, what the separation of work looks like, and it needs to be fair. If I am expecting the label to do everything, then it makes sense that they have a majority share. I know labels and artists have this like push and pull of like, how dare labels take 80% of the master? Like, that's crazy. I want a distribution deal, or I want a profit split, or I want a whatever. You can have all those things. You don't have to sign a record deal. You know, build leverage and then do that. If you want to sign a traditional record deal, they're putting a lot of risk on the table monetarily. They're probably putting a lot of risk on the table with workforce and time spent on the project. And so they're protecting their risk by having a certain weighted position on a lot of different artists. And they'll lose money, they'll lose their shirt on 10 artists, and they'll make a fortune on 3 artists. And that's how a record label functions. So for me right now, I'm in a place where
Sorry, hold that thought, because I think I'd love to ask you, I appreciate that thinking. It's not said enough.
Yeah.
And that's important to know that that's how the record labels operate.
Yeah.
They do put up a lot of capital if it's, you know, especially if you don't have leverage.
Yeah.
So yeah, of course the terms are going to be more favorable to the record label. You hear this term from certain artists say, doing a deal with a record label is like taking a bad loan.
Yeah.
Do you agree or disagree?
Jelly Roll just went on a rant about this, and he is so right. It's not a bad loan. It's just it's not. How do I word this? It's artists need to understand what they're getting into. They need to understand how recoupability works. It doesn't work. I made $1. The label takes 80%. I take 20%. I got 20 cents. No, you're recouping out of your 20 cents. So you're recouping your investment off of that really small share. So if the label gave you $2 million, they gave you $1 million in your pocket, they gave you a $500,000 recording fund and a $500,000 guaranteed marketing spend on the first album cycle, which wouldn't be a massive deal from a major perspective, but it would be a decent deal. Not decent in terms of terms, but it would be a decent risk investment from an artist perspective. If they gave you that deal, you're recouping a lot of that upfront capital through your 20% share while they're taking 80% off the top.
Why?
And artists don't understand that recoupability.
Why?
They think, I made $2 million, so the label recouped their $2 million. That's how it works.
Yeah.
No. The label took the risk, and they have the workforce, and they have the exhaustion of their network, and they have all of the effort that they put into breaking your record. And for that, they have said, we would like to do a deal. We're going to take 80%. And this is something where it's like, oh, this is malicious thinking. Like Jelly Roll, really had a certain opinion about it. I don't know that I personally have the same opinion. I respect his, but my thing was like, just you need to know what you're going into, because the other side of it is, as an artist, you don't have to sign a record deal. You don't have to sign the record deal that was presented to you. You don't ever have to sign a deal. Should you choose to take a $2 million check, you need to know where you sit in that leveraged position. And if you're not in a leveraged position to change the terms, don't take the check. Or I've actually seen artists do this where they have a really smart manager, they're making money on touring, and they're like, look, I don't want any money in my pocket. I don't need it. I need you guys to work my records. And also, I don't need that big of an A&R fund. Don't give that to me. I don't need that either. And also, the marketing fund should be discretionary. And they almost push back on the term saying, creatively, we like the landscape of this label. We think you guys are awesome. We think you have leverage. We think you get me. But I don't want that debt on my head. I want to get my royalties faster. And I want to get to a place where actually I want a reversion of my copyrights in 7 years. I want a reversion of my copyrights in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever you're able to negotiate. So I don't want your upfront money. I want to recoup fast. And then I want my masters back as my retirement plan in 5 years. Those seasoned artists are the ones that are doing the deals that make sense for themselves. There's a lot of naive artists that come in with their friendager that get, hey, $3 million check. And they're like, this is rad. I just made $3 million. I got $1 million in my pocket. No, you didn't. You live in California. First off, you're going to take 35% right off the top, 20% for a manager. You're going to take 5% for a lawyer. You're going to take, I guess you'll take 25%. You're not paying an agent for this. You're going to take 25% right off the top. Now you're at $750,000. Well, you're in a high tax bracket if you live in California, so take half of that. That's how much money you just made. So buy a house, put a down payment on a house. You're not even buying a house in California for that. You're going to put a down payment on a house, $1 million down payment on a house. Now you're paying your mortgage. Well, now you're also not receiving any royalties on that music. So I hope you have touring income or merchandising income or publishing income coming in, because that well will dry out. And you're not out of that deal when it dries out. And you can't go back to them and say, I don't have any more money, but I need to make more records, so can you guys give me more money? Like if you're doing moderately successful, they might. It'll go against your recoupability, so you're going to owe them again for it. But artists need to understand what they're walking into. And I'm not saying the deal is a bad deal. There's plenty of bad deals. But a major deal is a certain format. And so I think that it's just really important for artists to understand, like, you got to understand what you're signing.
You've seen artists at the label get back their royalty?
I've seen,
like, make the money, like they get a quarterly check.
I mean, I've been a part of some artists that have done very, very well.
Yeah.
So they've made back end.
Because you never hear that. You rarely hear that there are people that will make back end. It's like it's always kind of going cross into the next album and whatnot.
Well, that's also, I mean, that would be a very intense negotiation discussion for this podcast. But you can create pockets that are not crossed with other pockets. So you can have an album that's not crossed with your next album, so the recoupability is not crossed. And this is where it's like, understand what you're signing. Have a seasoned manager, have a seasoned lawyer. Understand what you're doing. So that 2 years into success, you're like, yo, where's my royalty check? Well, it's actually crossed with the next album, or it's actually crossed with this other thing that we did, and that thing is not recouped at all. But you did recoup this one, but now they're trying to recoup the investment on that other thing that we did. Remember how we borrowed that money for that live stream? Yeah, they're making this crossed with what we were doing. So you really have to understand the deal terms. And I think any deal makes sense for an artist as long as you understand it and you're operating as such. So if you're saying, I made my check from the label, I'm a kickback, I don't really want to go on tour, it's not my thing. And there's some artists that don't want to tour.
For sure.
And it's like, well, where do you think money is going to come in from in a second? Because you're going to run out of that money. So you better be setting up your touring. You better be setting up your audience, your fan base. So I just think that, like, Major labels get a really bad rap for some of these deals, but it's like, these deals are 50-page documents. Like, read it. Like, talk to your lawyer. If you don't understand it, ask the question.
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand paragraph B. Can you walk it through? By the way, ChatGPT, welcome to the gift of God. Put it in ChatGPT and say, write this as if I don't know what I'm talking about. What are they asking for?
Yeah.
It'll spit it out for you.
For sure.
So I think the artists need to educate themselves a little bit more when they go into these deals.
Can you just, I want to get a little bit more granular to that royalty rate, right? So let's say you're doing a $2 million deal. It's an 80-20, 80 for the label, 20 for the artist. You're not recouping on the full amount of the 2 million from like the 100%. You're recouping from the 20 that you have. So your 2 million, in order for you to recoup, has to recoup 5x.
Yeah.
Which, so now that deal has to do 10 million.
Yeah.
Why is it just the 20?
The label assesses risk. So the label is taking the 80% off the top. And this is where it's like, is it right? Is it not right? I don't know. It's the format. It's the format that they chose. Label is also, we talked about it earlier. How many people is the label signed? 60. So there's 60 moments where the label said, here's a check. There's 60 moments where they said, hey, marketing director, I know you have that big priority, but now here's 7 other artists that maybe one day might be. It's a time suck for you. So you're not gonna have that, remember I said one of the biggest holes in a lot of labels is creative ideation. It's like, you don't have time for that because you're doing these other things. So labels are factoring in that. It's like when you're doing a really, really, really intense like budget on a tour. Like you're like, oh, well the tour bus costs this and our flights cost that and our tour manager costs this and it's whatever. And then you start touring for a few years and you're like, how much does the insurance for that one show cost if you amortize it from our premium? $7. We'll put that on the budget. How much does this? And you start to understand like there's so many different line items that are added up on top of those basic salaries and stuff. Labels are doing the same thing. So labels are like, how much does our workforce cost? When you look at the lifestyle of a marketing director at a major record label, they're making money. They're making good money. You have to pay for that. So if you're a record label, you have a ton of money in overhead, in salaries, in time spent. So that's why labels are justifying, we're taking this money off the top because the risk versus reward is very high. It is more likely that out of our 60 artists that are signed, 50 of them are going to end up in an unrecouped space in the next 10 years. It is likely that that is going to happen. So for that, we're going to protect our wins by taking this amount of money. I'm not justifying it, but I'm saying that's why. That's what they're doing.